Winter 1919, Moscow.
Oh.
A freezing studio. Vladimir Mayakovsky's 6'3" booming voice, a face carved from granite, is bent over a sheet of paper. There's no heat in this room, and there is no time for typesetting. He paints directly onto stencils, letter by letter, image by image.
Yeah.
He's stenciling over 2,000 Rasta posters with slogans like, "How to clean your rifle." And he is doing this while Denikin's white forces advance on the city gates. This is In Defense of October, Episode 6, The Revolutionary Avant-Garde Art and Culture. Part 2, The Laboratory.
The question this part takes up is, what did the avant-garde actually produce in the laboratory of the early 1920s, and what tensions were already present in that extraordinary flourishing?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Host A.
And I'm Host B.
We are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of any political faction. We are examining the historical events and ideas as they are presented in the source material. So before we step into the early 1920s, let's just, establish where we left off. The October Revolution detonated an unprecedented artistic explosion across the former Russian Empire.
Right. It drew all these anarchist, bohemian, and avant-garde artists directly to the new workers' state.
Yeah, the old aristocratic networks of patronage vanished overnight. By 1919, virtually every significant left artist had thrown in their lot with the revolution.
Right.
To really grasp this, though, you have to look at the physical reality of the early 1920s. You're walking through a dense network of state-funded workspaces. You pass through the doors of the state-free art workshops. You visit the Institute of Artistic Culture, known by its Russian acronym INKUK.
And the environment around them is just brutal.
Extremely. I mean, you are looking at a society struggling with immense famine, a crippling blockade, total industrial ruin left over from the First World War and the Civil War.
Yeah.
Yet simultaneously, you're witnessing the creation of a vibrant, electric hotbed of creative experimentation.
The contrast is just stark.
Yeah, people are starving in the streets, but inside these workshops, they are redesigning the visual language of the future.
Which really brings us to the clash of artistic currents.
Right. The sheer scale of this laboratory becomes clear when you look at that clash. You start with Kazimir Malevich. Back in 1915, Malevich unveiled his black square.
Which is exactly what it sounds like.
Literally a black square on a white canvas. But the context matters. He hung it high in the corner of the room, exactly where the Orthodox icon traditionally belonged in a Russian peasant home.
Oh, wow.
It's like if someone today took down the flag in a classroom and replaced it with a blank white canvas. It was a profound, aggressive philosophical act, an absolute break with representation.
Because Malevich operated from a position of philosophical idealism.
Exactly. He sought pure feeling, pure form. And he harbored this, harsh rejection of utilitarianism, dismissing anything that served a purely functional purpose as mere subsistence art.
Yeah, the idealist wing of the avant-garde maintained a deep skepticism toward art being reduced to mere engineering. We see this tension clearly articulated by Wassily Kandinsky. In 1920, Kandinsky issued a warning to his fellow artists, writing that they might try to find a positive solution too easily and too ardently from the engineer and accept the engineer's answer as the solution for art quite erroneously.
But that idealism stood in direct contrast with the rising tide of constructivism.
Right.
Vladimir Tatlin championed what he called the culture of materials. Truth wasn't found in spiritual abstraction, but in the physical properties of wood, iron, and glass. Tatlin designed the monument to the Third International.
The famous unbuilt tower.
Yes, this spiraling 400-meter iron tower meant to dwarf the Eiffel Tower. It was designed to straddle the Neva River in Petrograd, leaning at an angle to mimic the Earth's axis.
And inside that helix.
Right, 3 rotating glass volumes. A cube for legislative assemblies that would rotate once a year. A pyramid for executive functions rotating once a month. And a cylinder for information and propaganda rotating once a day.
It was literally designed to be a factory of political administration.
Exactly. But wait, this brings up a massive contradiction for anyone studying this era. I mean, how does an artist go from pure anarchist individualism, seeking absolute personal freedom, to embracing a strict factory-like discipline?
Well, the answer is found by tracing the trajectory of Alexander Rodchenko. His evolution demonstrates this exact pivot. In April 1919, Rodchenko was still firmly rooted in individualism. We can look at his exhibition catalog from that month, where he chose to feature 2 very specific quotations.
What were they?
He quoted the anarchist philosopher Max Stirner that I destroy myself only shows that I exist. And he quoted the American poet Walt Whitman, what invigorates life invigorates death.
I mean, that is incredibly bleak.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate party of one mentality. He's defining his art entirely through the lens of individual will.
Exactly, but watch what happens just 2 years later. His anti-individualist turn is absolute. In March 1921, Rodchenko wrote, "Construction is a thing or a task that is approached with a precise working schedule, and in which all materials and all their specific components are organized and used according to their correct functions without adding anything superfluous."
That's a massive shift.
It is. And he followed this by declaring, composition is always an expression of individualism and everything individualism implies.
So he's completely rejecting the individual. And, that rejection led to extreme excesses within the constructivist movement. The rhetoric became increasingly hostile to the very concept of art.
Right, they really pushed it to the limit.
Yeah, you have the Stenberg brothers publicly demanding that artists be treated exactly as the Cheka treats counter-revolutionaries.
And just to clarify, the Cheka was the Soviet state's secret police.
Right. The Stenberg brothers were essentially demanding the literal, forceful elimination of traditional art because they viewed canvas painting as bourgeois hoarding. You have Konstantin Medianetsky announcing to the world, "Art ends with us," and Boris Arvatov declaring the end of culture altogether.
So how do we make sense of that?
To really understand this, you have to look at the psychology of these artists. This is the self-liquidation of a guilty middle-class intelligentsia. They are watching the brutal sacrifices of the factory workers and the Red Army soldiers, and they're reacting by trying to annihilate their own privileged status as creators.
And the theoretical drive behind this self-liquidation was captured by the critic Osip Brick. In the journal Art of the Commune, Brick raised a new slogan: not idealistic fog, but the material things. The artists wanted to merge completely with the industrial ambitions of the Bolsheviks.
And the Bolsheviks welcomed that.
Yes, Leon Trotsky described their shared goals, noting that they stood for technique, for scientific organization, for the machine, for planfulness, for willpower, for courage, for speed, for precision, and for the new man who is armed with all these things. We must understand the abstract Marxist concept operating here. The material conditions of a ruined economy demanded massive, immediate reconstruction.
The physical reality just dictated the terms.
Right. The working class was bleeding to keep the state alive. The artists, recognizing that objective material reality, felt compelled to abandon aesthetic contemplation. Their utilitarian shift was a direct response to the absolute necessity of material production.
And this push for material production bled perfectly out of the workshops and into the written and visual arts, which brings us back to our opening scene with Vladimir Mayakovsky.
Gentling the posters.
Exactly.
Oh.
He became the beating heart of the left front of the arts, or LEF.
Yeah.
He's writing these massive driving poems like 150 million. And at the top of my voice, that title, 150 million, was actually the population of Soviet Russia. He originally published it anonymously because he wanted the author to be the masses themselves. He is attempting to merge his poetry entirely with the demands of the state. He makes his tragic attempt to set his heel on the throat of my own song. He's trying, through sheer force of will, to renounce his own personality for the collective.
And Mayakovsky explicitly stated this ambition, he declared. To hell with individualism. We can even renounce our own personality.
Which is a heavy thing for a poet to say.
It is. But here we must examine the theoretical limits of extreme utilitarianism and the social role of art. The attempt to entirely renounce the personality is based on a mechanical misunderstanding of human psychology and culture. Art isn't merely a manufactured object serving a utilitarian function. It is a fundamental form of human cognition. It is a way that society understands itself, processes reality, and develops its emotional and psychological depth. To demand the liquidation of the individual personality into a machine-like collective is to strip art of its essential subjective component. The working class requires a rich, complex cultural life to fully emancipate itself. The extreme utilitarianism of LEF anticipated a stage of historical development that did not yet exist, and in doing so, threatened to starve the very human element that makes socialist construction possible.
But we do see that massive, complex cultural life forging itself in a completely new medium during this time, Soviet cinema.
Yes.
The ultimate medium for the masses was forged directly in the fires of the Civil War. These directors didn't learn their craft in comfortable academies. They learned it on the agit trains.
These mobile propaganda units.
Yeah, specially equipped train cars, carrying printing presses, libraries, and film projectors. They traveled to the front lines, pulling down a screen on the side of a boxcar and projecting footage for illiterate peasants and soldiers who had, literally never seen a moving photograph in their lives. They were quite literally learning how to speak a new visual language on the fly.
The Bolshevik leadership recognized the unprecedented power of this new technology. Trotsky outlined its social function in Pravda in 1923. The cinema competes not only with the tavern but with the church. It is the most important instrument of technique, education, and agitation.
And Sergei Eisenstein took that instrument and created Battleship Potemkin. You've likely seen the famous Odessa Steps montage.
It's iconic.
It's a masterpiece of visual collision. You have the steady, mechanical, terrifying march of the Tsar's soldiers moving down the stone steps, intercut with the erratic, panicked movement of the fleeing crowd, the sudden, sharp image of a runaway baby carriage bouncing down the stone, a shattering pair of eyeglasses, a screaming face. Eisenstein is not just telling a story, he is engineering a psychological explosion in the viewer's mind through the friction of the edit.
Forcing the viewer to synthesize those images.
Yes, forcing them to synthesize clashing images into a feeling of absolute terror and righteous anger.
And the philosophical foundation of that film was explicitly drawn from the revolution's history. We know this because of the original 1925 epigraph of Potemkin, which was later suppressed by the bureaucracy.
What was the epigraph?
It was taken directly from Trotsky's history of 1905. The spirit of insurrection hovered over the Russian land. Some enormous and mysterious process was taking place in countless hearts. The individual was dissolving in the mass, and the mass was dissolving in the outburst.
That perfectly captures his visual approach. And, Eisenstein wasn't alone in this cinematic laboratory. You have Dziga Vertov rapidly pushing the boundaries of the documentary form with Man with a Movie Camera.
The Kino eye.
Right. Vertov believed the human eye was deeply flawed and subjective, but the camera lens was superior. A mechanical eye capable of decoding the chaos of urban life and industrial machinery into this symphony of objective truth.
And then there's Pudovkin.
Yes, Vsevolod Pudovkin directing Mother. Pudovkin utilized montage not just for visual collision, but for deep psychological metaphor.
Like the ice flow scene.
Exactly. He intercuts scenes of a workers' strike with a powerful image of an ice flow breaking up on a thawing river. Why does that work? Because the strike is no longer just men walking out of a factory. The edit transforms it into a force of nature.
The workers are the spring thaw.
Yes, shattering the frozen dead winter of the old world. And finally, you have Alexander Rabinowitch directing Earth. He anchored the brutal struggle for agricultural collectivization in the deep lyrical rhythms of nature. He lingers on the visual weight of apples falling from trees. He's mapping the vast social upheaval of the peasantry onto the eternal cycle of life, death, and harvest.
And those powerful cinema visuals were intimately connected to live performance, right?
Absolutely. The theater was completely dismantled and rebuilt. Vsevolod Meyerhold developed a system of actor training called biomechanics.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
He abandoned the traditional proscenium arch and psychological realism. His actors performed on constructivist sets. They executed Taylorist physical drills on bare stages.
Wait, Taylorism? Like the American capitalist factory management system?
Precisely. Frederick Winslow Taylor broke down factory labor into precise kinetic fractions to maximize efficiency. Meyerhold took that industrial motion study and applied it to human actors.
Oh, wow. So instead of actors weeping or relying on emotional memory,
They are treating their bodies as efficient machines. They trained in gymnastics and circus acrobatics. You look at his 1924 production of The Forest, or his 1926 production of The Government Inspector. You don't see drawing rooms and emotional dialogue. You see a factory of movement.
that's a total reinvention of the form.
Yeah, you see actors utilizing ramps and platforms, turning their own bodies into precise, expressive machinery. The audience never forgets they are watching workers perform labor.
Right.
Now, we really need to zoom out and look at the massive institutional infrastructure that funded all of this. We're talking about the Museum of Painterly Culture. We're talking about VGIK, which was the first state film school in the world. The State Porcelain Factory, which actually took old imperial plates and painted revolutionary slogans directly over the Tsar's monogram. And Narkompros, the Commissariat of Enlightenment. That was run by Anatoly Lunacharsky, who protected a lot of these wild artists from rigid party members.
Narkompros was really the engine behind all this.
It was. The workers' state is pouring resources into these avant-garde experiments. But this naturally raises a targeted doubt for you as a listener.
Which is?
If the state is funding all this, doesn't the state control what gets made? Doesn't the state dictate the terms of the art?
Well, that assumption fundamentally misunderstands the dynamic of the early 1920s. There's an intense tension between the artists and the state leadership, yes, but it was not a totalitarian dictate. We can look at Lenin's reaction to Mayakovsky. In May 1921, Lenin wrote a letter to Lenin and Trotsky rebuking the publication of Mayakovsky's epic poem. Lenin wrote, "Aren't you ashamed to vote for printing 5,000 copies of Mayakovsky's 150 million? It is nonsense, double-dyed stupidity and affectation."
Tell us how you really feel.
Right. Yet, despite Lenin's personal distaste for futurism, he did not ban it. The official cultural policy was fundamentally protective of artistic freedom. Trotsky articulated this defense of artistic independence in Literature and Revolution. He wrote that the avant-garde had to learn to stand on its own two legs without any attempt to have itself decreed official by the government. Furthermore, he insisted that new forms had to find for themselves and independently an access into the consciousness of the advanced elements of the working class.
So how do we synthesize all of this?
We must bring these threads together to understand the true nature of the laboratory. The Bolshevik cultural policy, which was defended fiercely by Trotsky against various forms of sectarianism, established a clear boundary. The role of state power is to build the material infrastructure for culture. It must provide the presses, the theaters, the film stock, and the academies. But the state must not decree, codify, or mandate specific artistic styles. The state is not an art critic armed with police powers. This approach is rooted in a fundamental Marxist principle regarding the nature of the state and class society. Sectarian groups within the avant-garde attempted to artificially formulate a pure, isolated proletarian culture in their laboratories. They believed they could mandate a new class culture by decree, but proletarian culture cannot be manufactured in a laboratory. The working class does not seize state power in order to build a permanent, static working class culture. The historical mission of the working class is entirely different from the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie took power to eternalize its own class rule and its own class culture. The working class takes power to abolish class society altogether. Therefore, the transitional period of the dictatorship of the proletariat is not a time to codify a new class culture, but rather to absorb the highest achievements of humanity and lay the foundations for a truly universal, classless human culture. The laboratory of the 1920s was the chaotic, brilliant beginning of that historic assimilation.
The laboratory is open, the experiments continue, but a fundamental debate is brewing. What is proletarian culture? Can the working class create its own art before the socialist reconstruction of society? Next time on In Defense of October. Episode 6, The Revolutionary Avant-Garde. Art and Culture. Part 3, The Debate in the Shadow. Bogdanov and the Prolet Cult Deviation. Trotsky's Literature and Revolution. The great editor Alexander Rabinowitch. And the rising shadow of the bureaucratic counter-revolution that will devour this entire generation of geniuses. Fade out to silence.